Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very exciting show today, and I can see just from the chat already that there's a lot of people that are already waiting for this. I do want to put in a plug right here at the beginning for what happened? Just a minute.
Everything's fine.
I've got a minor issue here. There we go. I was watching my own copy of the show, and it was showing that there was 11 minutes left to go before the show started, and I'm going, what's that all about? But anyway, I wanted to put in a plug for Dr. Josh Bowen's book, The Atheist's Guide to the Old Testament. I did not use anything directly from this book for what I'm about to present, but I did use a lot indirectly. It was the guide that I used to figure out where to go and how to find various things that I was looking for. And with that said, today's topic is there evidence for a global flood? And today, Otangelo has taken the affirmative, I am taking the negative, and Randolf Richardson is our host. Hello and welcome, Otangelo and Randolph.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us. We have a great crowd here today, and I hope that everyone gets something out of this, and I hope this turns out to be a good conversation. Now, the format of this is, it is a conversation, not a debate, but we are doing the beginning of it kind of like a debate. We are both going to do an opening presentation. So Otangelo will go first, and he will have 15 minutes-ish to present his side of the case. Then I will go second, and I will present my side of the case. Randolph will watch the chat for any comments or questions that you might have for us that we can address afterward. And then after each has done their opening presentation, then we'll just have a discussion.
Excellent.
Okay, take it away, Otangelo.
Yes, let me share here the screen.
Now, Otangelo's opening statement has an approximate time of 15 minutes. It is possible he may go a little bit longer or shorter, and we're okay with that, just so that everybody in the audience has an idea of the expectation.
Okay, as soon as the screen is shared, you give me the okay, and I'll start my presentation. Okay.
Start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I just shared the screen. Is it visible? Can I start?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so was Noah's flood a real event or just an ancient myth? When did Noah's flood supposedly happen? According to answers in Genesis, the flood occurred 2348 BC, but the pyramids of Giza were built 2478 BC. That is 130 years earlier. In other words, before Noah's flood. So how could the Egyptians have built the pyramids when the nation of Egypt didn't even exist, but only after the Tower of Babel? That makes no sense. The pyramids are built on top of sedimentary layers which contain fossils. I think that these layers were laid down during the flood, which is evidence that the pyramids were built after the flood. Also, the name Egypt in Hebrew is Mizraim. Mizraim is the son of Ham and the grandson of Noah. So clearly, the Egyptians are the descendants of Noah's grandson. So the question is the biblical timeline giving us a false or inaccurate account? Well, I think following solves the problem. Modern translations are translated from the Hebrew Masoretic text, which is not the original Hebrew, but rather it is a copy of the Leningrad Codex, which was copied in the 11th century AD. But the Greek Septuagint was translated more than 1,000 years before, in 250 BC, and would not have been translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, but rather from a different older copy of the Hebrew, which is no longer available. So without going too much into the details, the conclusion is that the Septuagint adds 650 years to the history. That puts
Excuse me,
Noah's
Otangelo, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There is a crackling sound coming from your audio. I just checked with the audience to make sure it's not just me hearing that. And I don't know if there's something you can do to make an adjustment to make the audio sound clearer. I don't like to interrupt, but I think this is important. Okay, we can't hear you now. You're muted. You've muted yourself in StreamYard.
This is still tracking.
Okay, so now we can hear you. Go ahead and say something.
This is still cracking.
Oh, Otangelo,
This
if
is
you're
still
talking,
cracking.
It's not crackling, but your level is really low. Can you get maybe closer to the mic?
yeah, we want to make sure we can hear you clearly.
Yeah.
Somebody in the
Now,
Otangelo, somebody in the chat has indicated that this often happens when you are sharing a screen. I don't know if there's some interference.
Okay, so
If that's a clue, if that's helpful.
okay, is it better now?
Very good.
No, that's worse.
It's worse.
To our
Yeah.
audience, I apologize for the audio issues. We did make sure that audio was working before the stream began. Please just bear with us for a few moments while we get this sorted out.
So how about now? Is it better now?
There's a bit of a background hum, so maybe you need to change the gain a little bit on your microphone.
Yeah. Is it better now?
Maybe change it the other direction. The background noise.
Peter Gonna Go For It has suggested that possibly the problem is that he has too many tabs open in Chrome, and having that many tabs open is causing the issues.
Okay. Let me
Oh,
close
this
it.
sounds better, Otangelo.
Okay, is it better now?
Yeah, sounds really good. Your
Yes.
volume's a little bit low, but this sounds very good now. The quality is much better.
Let me check if I put the volume a little bit more. Is it better now?
Oh, this is perfect. Okay.
Yes, that's good.
Okay.
I'm
Okay,
going
you
to
can
mute myself
continue.
again until he's done.
Yeah, we can continue. You won't
Okay.
lose any time on the presentation. Go ahead. Whenever you're
So
ready.
shall I continue? Okay. So that puts Noah's flood back to 3000 BC and solves the problem. Also, 522 years is plenty of time for the world to repopulate, for the Tower of Babel event, and for nations to have spread all over the earth. That would have given a time span of 400 years to go from Noah's flood to the Tower of Babel. And that timeline would also match with the beginning of civilization in Mesopotamia. Another talking point is mentioned by Aaron Ra. He asks, to flood the world the way the Bible said would take roughly 3 times the amount of water we already have. Where did all this extra water come from? The mantle could hold 2 or 3 times the amount of water in the oceans. Some scientists now argue that a huge reservoir of water could be lurking far beneath our feet. There is a claim that we came out of Africa about 60,000 years ago, which contradicts the biblical narrative. But more and more new evidence puts that hypothesis into doubt. There are many different sources and lines of evidence that challenge the out of Africa model. There is evidence that humans rather started migration from Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed. Today, we know of hundreds of flood stories from every culture in every corner of the globe, from the present dating back to the dawn of writing. Many share similar stories, as can be seen in the table above, with statistics of flood stories all over the world. One of the most stunning evidences that Noah's Ark is a real history is coded into the Chinese language. For example, the Chinese word of large ship is a compound of three other words, 8 persons boat. Only available in recent times, we can now test accounts of mankind's past by studying similarities and differences in human genes. What we know about mitochondrial DNA of humans fits the 6,700-year timescale, explains the 3 haplogroups. Genetic studies have confirmed the recent ancestry of human beings now living on the Earth, which is evidence that we all descend from Adam, Eve, and Noah's family. All humans are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup. By comparing the mitochondrial DNA of 147 people from 5 different ethnic groups, researchers have found that all the individuals analyzed were descendants of the same female lineage, that is, they all had the same original mother. Thus, they confirmed that all humanity descends from the same woman who was the first Homo sapiens, and they called her mitochondrial Eve. In another video, How Geology Disproves Noah's Flood, Aaron Ra claimed the interrelated dynamic processes of the rock cycle and pieced together Earth's history from the vertical sequence of rock layers around the world permits the conclusion that the Earth must be older than thousands of years. But most of the fossil-bearing rocks on the Earth, however, could also have been formed during the year-long Noah's flood. There is no evidence that the rock cycle could not have formed rapidly. Besides the rock cycle, there are also biochemical energy cycles that are essential for advanced life on Earth, to name the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the global carbon cycle, and the phosphorus, iron, and trace mineral cycles. The 5 element cycles are clearly interdependent, and any change in one cycle will in the long term have profound influence on the operation of the other 4. The most remarkable one is the nitrogen cycle. It incorporates a broad spectrum of bacteria that work in a joint venture together in a coordinated assembly line manner that is extraordinary and impressive. Nitrogen is a part of vital organic compounds in all life forms, such as amino acids, proteins, and DNA. Nitrogen gas makes up 78% of the atmosphere. Nitrogen in gas form cannot be absorbed by plants and animals. It must be first converted by nitrifying bacteria so that it can enter food chains as part of the nitrogen cycle. If that cycle was not formed from the beginning, nitrogen in the form of ammonia would not be sufficiently available and life could not have started. We have also geological evidence of Noah's flood. The pre-flood geographical environment was drastically different than after the flood. Exelheiberg Island and Ellesmere Islands in the Canadian Arctic have been discovered to harbor the remains of a vast array of prehistoric animals and vegetation. Recently, giant camels have been found up in the north. And there is evidence that there were vast forests. In 2017, news reported the secular science community has no viable answers to explain the remarkable findings like these. These discoveries demonstrate that a much warmer global climate existed in the pre-flood world. The Antarctic also reveals similar evidence that the climate was much warmer. Large deposits of coal and oil indicate large forests and life lived there in the past. The recent discovery of ancient rainforests at the South Pole in Antarctica through analysis of pollen, preserved roots, and spores showed that the world at the time was a lot warmer than the scientific community previously thought. The preservation of this forest is exceptional, but even more surprising is the world it reveals. Even during months of darkness, temperate rainforests were able to grow close to the South Pole. Any hypothesis must explain how these plants grew and how they received the solar light from the sun to support them. The evolutionary theory fails 100% in this area. Only the global flood hypothesis provides an answer to this. Simple climate change cannot account for what we observe. So another topic that comes up frequently is the issue of the heat problem. Critics still have a problem with the heat generated from this, so let's answer this now. What I believe they just don't understand is that while subduction is occurring quickly, heat from this friction is being produced, and they consider this the heat problem. However, what is not realized is that because of the icy hail that brought on this ice age and global reduction of temperatures, freezing lakes and reducing significantly the ocean temperature, the heat generated would not be a problem whatsoever. The oceans would have absorbed this heat easily.
You have approximately 5 minutes left.
Okay. It would be like pouring liquid lava into the pool. It would do nothing to change its temperature. Entire ecosystems are buried in enormous deposits that later turn into coal, such as the extensive Appalachian coal beds. In fact, the US has over 7 trillion tons of coal reserves, but where did it come from? While we know that dead plant material being sandwiched between sediments is the cause, we know that we don't have enough vegetation on the Earth to produce that much. This proves that the pre-flood world was mostly covered by lush vegetation, and the rising flood waters and tsunamis were necessary to sweep over the lands and cover the vegetation to form the coal that we now see in this world today. Noah's flood was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mud, bearing giant creatures like the Tyrannosaurus rex under 50 feet of mud. It was entombed so quickly that it preserved blood cells and blood vessels and bone cells. And how to explain the massive graveyards in northern Montana that are over 1.2 miles long and contain 30 million fossil fragments that were simultaneously buried in this huge collection of bones? Psalm 104 describes the mountains being raised at the end of the flood, and that explains why sea creatures are found on mountaintops all over the world. How many animals needed to be in the ark? There are several different estimates. The book The Genesis Flood estimated that approximately 35,000 creatures were on board the ship. There are an estimated 8.7 million animal species on Earth, but only 1.2 million have been catalogued in a central database. I believe that the animals on the ark could have speciated rapidly to get the number we have today. Noah probably stored the food and water near each animal. Drinking water could have used some sort of self-feeders, as is commonly done for birds. It would have been relatively easy and probably essential.
Approximately 2 minutes left.
Okay. They did find chickpeas on the floor of the wooden structure on Mount Ararat, which I think are the remains of Noah's Ark that I'm soon going to talk about. Noah might have just let the poo pile up in the bottom deck. Maybe he used a low-tech solution, a methane digester. That would have been a practical solution for a stinky problem. In any case, I don't see any unsurmountable problem without solution. In 2008, Ahmet Ertuğrul, aka Parachute, a Kurdish mountaineering expert, did find on Mount Ararat the wooden structure that I became aware of in 2010. In 2009, NAMI, a Chinese-Turkish team, made the movie of the large wood structure under ice that Parachute discovered on an elevation of 4,200 meters above sea level. It became a major controversy, with ARC searchers claiming that the finding was a fraud. Then in April last year, I met Philip Williams on Facebook. He is the first American that did visit the structure in 2014. After a long investigation and conversations with Philip, I came to the conclusion that this finding is most likely Noah's Ark. Noteworthy is what Randolph Junker, a PhD professor of archaeology and history of antiquity, said about this finding. I think this discovery would be very important. It had not been paid much attention to it before. Indeed, I was skeptical. But since I have been looking into it more, studying the images and talking to a number of people involved, including 2 people I know and trust who have actually been on the site, I am convinced it is not a recent fraud or fake. It has been up there for some time, so it is a legitimate archaeological site, and as such, it deserves a careful examination.
Do you need another minute or so, Otangelo, or is that does that conclude it?
Yeah, I concluded. I finished.
Wow, that was good timing. Yeah, I wanted to make sure the audio challenge we had didn't cut into your time. So I'm glad that that timing worked out. Now, there is one question from the chat that came up during Otangelo's presentation. Godless Granny, shall I ask it now, or should we go with your presentation first?
Go ahead and address the question first. Who's
Okay.
it from? And I'll look for it.
It is from Autobot Starscream, and it's at 17 after of the hour. The question is Homo sapien being part Homo erectus, ancient African Hamite, and part Neanderthal, ancient European Japhetite, why we have the biblical idea of them starting in the middle at summer? And Otangelo, I will paste this into the private chat for you so you can see it. There it is. This question, it wasn't specifically addressed to Otangelo or Godless Granny. So Otangelo, if you'd like to answer it first, go ahead, because you were doing the presentation. And Godless Granny, if you would prefer to answer this after your presentation or before, I'll leave that up to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I am not sure about Homo erectus, but I believe that the Neanderthals, they belong to the human species. They are some kind of genetic, I don't know, entropy or disorder or something like that.
Okay, well, thank you. And just a quick note, your audio is starting to crackle up again now that your presentation is off. So we might just need to work on that a little bit, going back to the previous setting.
Well, maybe without the video.
Oh,
I don't know.
There's almost no crackling now, so that's fine.
Okay.
And Godless Granny, if you'd like to begin with your presentation, or I don't know if you want to address that question before or after your presentation, I'll leave that to you.
I simply do not know the answer to that question. I have
Okay.
no answer to that question. But I will go ahead and go into my presentation. First, I do want to note that when we agreed to do this stream, that and this can be part of the presentation, that's fine. We said that this was going to be a discussion of the historical and archaeological evidence for or against the flood. And so when I do not address a lot of the issues that Otangelo brought up, primarily that is because those were not what we agreed to as the topic for today. Second, Otangelo gave me his sources, and 3/4 of what he presented in the material was not in the sources that he gave me as to what he would be working from. But I don't have a problem with that, because I actually find most of that to be irrelevant, as you will hear from my presentation. Claims about Noah's Ark finds are irrelevant to this discussion. The discussion is whether or not there was a global flood, not whether or not there has ever been an ancient wood structure or boat. Was what was found on that mountain even a boat, or was it a shelter built on the side of the mountain? The Yonker quote that Otangelo brought up at the end of his presentation, it mentioned that this was an important find, not what the find was, or that it was a boat, or that this was Noah's boat, just that this was an important find. And a dwelling structure on the side of a mountain, an ancient dwelling structure, of course that's an important archaeological find, whether it was a boat or not. If it was a boat, there very well could have been a person who built the boat and used it to escape a flood. I would grant such a story to even be likely. This person could have taken his livestock with him, and anyone who saw this boat and thought that they may have thought that it looked like he had every kind of animal on the boat with him. Such could very well be the basis of the flood myths that have developed. So finding an ancient boat, even a boat on a mountain, does nothing to prove or even provide evidence for a global flood. It is only evidence of an ancient boat. Yes, ancient boats were real things. I'll grant you that. A particular boat being the boat that was the basis of the Noah myth, I'll even grant that as a possibility, although I consider it quite unlikely. But even if you found the actual boat that was Noah's boat, this does nothing to prove that there was a global flood. All you have proven is the finding of a boat. Even if it was Noah's boat, the boat is not evidence of a flood. Had you found evidence of pieces of this same boat being found in various places around the globe, this would have been better evidence, as it would show that this boat had traveled beyond its near vicinity. But even that would still not be evidence of a flood. If the pieces had been found in areas where you would not find water, this would be a little bit closer. Or had you presented evidence of something on or in the boat that could only be found somewhere far from the boat, like maybe animal remains from a giant panda or from kangaroos, animals that would have had to have traveled thousands of miles to get to the boat, that would be better evidence. But even that would not prove a global flood. It would prove evidence of animals traveling impossible distances to reach this boat, or the boat traveling far distances to pick them up. But it would, again, not be evidence of a flood. Evidence of floods abounds in the world. Flood leaves evidence in geology and archaeology, yet nowhere has evidence been found that there was flooding simultaneously around the globe. There is evidence of a massive flood in the area where the Bible claims that Noah was from, and even around that time, give or take a few centuries, of when the biblical flood was supposed to have occurred. But even though it was a massive flood, there is no evidence and even counter evidence to it being a global flood. To the people of the time in the area, it would have seemed to have covered the world, but we know from today's perspective that it did not. How do we know this? We know this from history, geology, biology, and archaeology. This discussion, however, will be limited to history and archaeology, because if we tried to cover all the reasons that we know that there was no global flood, we would be here all night. There were at least 5 civilizations flourishing at the time of the alleged flood. They were located in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Peru, and Africa. First, all of these civilizations continued to exist after the alleged flood without an extinction event. If you believe the story of the flood, everything that had breath was killed during the flood. No humans survived the flood. Following the flood, God told the people to multiply and replenish the earth, but people didn't do that. They all stayed together and built a big city. This was the reason for the Tower of Babel. Piper, Spectacular Sins. God had to confuse the languages of the people to get them to move away from each other and to spread out across the earth. No one knows exactly how long after the flood this allegedly happened. Answers in Genesis estimates 100 years. The Bible does list 3 generations of descendants from Noah's sons before it has the story of the Tower of Babel. But there had to be enough time to pass for the 8 survivors to become enough people to build the great city that is described in Genesis 11. I have also seen apologists argue that the Hebrew Bible has the dates wrong, which I will detail in a few minutes, moving the Tower of Babel to 400 years after the flood, which further damages the argument that there ever was a global flood, as now there must be at least a 400-year period on which there is no archaeological evidence of human existence on the face of the earth, except in Babylon, the location of the Tower of Babel. Archaeology does not support this hypothesis either. If such a gap in human history occurred, we should see evidence of this in the archaeological record. As strata are dated at various archaeological digs across the globe, we would expect to find each ancient civilization coming to an abrupt and catastrophic end, such as what was found in Pompeii at the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. But this is not what archaeologists and historians find when we study ancient artifacts. Instead, they find evidence of ancient civilizations that existed before the alleged flood and after the alleged flood, without an extinction event dividing the strata. There is archaeological evidence of such extinction events in many locations, such as the excavation of the city of Jericho, but there is no such matching occurrence at every civilization around the globe for a single time period. In no history class have I ever heard a professor talk about how every civilization vanished and then sprung up again a couple hundred years later. Could people have simply restarted new civilizations on the exact spots where the old civilizations had existed? If so, how would the new settlers find the old civilizations to move into these ancient cities? The entire earth was supposed to have been covered with 20 feet of water. The surface of the earth was supposed to be so eroded that the geologic column all formed in this global flood. All the fossils that we find that date to before the alleged flood were supposed to have been created by this flood. Yet somehow all the artifacts from these ancient civilizations were miraculously preserved and all landed on top of the rocks and fossils, making it appear that they are relatively new as compared to the fossils underneath. Somehow God preserved pottery while destroying everything that breathes. Next, Egyptians were some of the best ancient historians of the world. Our knowledge of ancient Egypt stems from this fact. 2686 to 2181 BCE is called the Old Kingdom Age in Egypt, and this was the age of the Great Pyramid builders. The Great Pyramids were built right about the same time as this alleged flood. If Egypt was devoid of humans from about 2500 to 2400 BCE, how did the pyramids manage to build themselves during this same time frame? When a few of the people from the city of Babel migrated to Egypt in about 2350 BCE to rebuild it, the population could not have sustained the great building that we see even today that arose from that period. I have seen some apologists try to solve this problem by putting the date for the flood earlier and the Tower of Babel later. They say the Hebrew Bible differs from the Greek Septuagint, Sumerian Pentateuch, and Josephus, that those all agree that Noah's offspring, the age of each of their children is missing a digit and they are off by 100 years. These apologists claim that the Tower of Babel was 400 years after the flood. They do this to address the problem of there not being a sufficient number of people to build the tower just 100 years after the flood, nor enough to build the pyramids of Egypt. To make this case, they move the flood back 600 years and the building of the pyramids forward 200 years. But this is done entirely based on the interpretation of some various ancient manuscripts of the Bible. They dismiss the entire field of Egyptology without so much as a nod. Historians tell us that the first pyramid was built in about 2551 BCE. If you go with the early date for the flood and the longer time to the Tower of Babel, there should be no humans in Egypt at the time the pyramids are being built. If you go with the AIG view, the view of the Hebrew Bible, that the flood occurred in about 2348 BCE, then the pyramids were built before the flood, and we should see evidence of flood damage on the pyramids, but we don't. Even the pyramids, which are only 2,300 miles or 3,700 kilometers from where the boat allegedly ended up, show no evidence of flood damage. This is another reason that some apologists move the date of the flood back to avoid the issue of there being no evidence of flood damage on the pyramids today. Even though the Great Pyramids were complete before the beginning of the alleged flood, pyramid building continued in Egypt, with lesser pyramids being built during the reign of King Unas, 2375 to 2345 BC, through the end of the last of the pyramid builders, Pepi II, 2278 to 2184 BC. The flood is supposed to have occurred during the reign of Unas, and Egypt is supposed to be devoid of all life during the time of pharaohs Teti and Meroe-Uka. Yet instead, what historians find is more pyramids being built, though not to as great a scale as in the time of the Great Pyramids. The final nail in the coffin comes from DNA. If the pre-flood people in South America were wiped out and a new people group came from the Ark to resettle in the exact same place, there would be no ancestral link between the new settlers and the old settlers. Yet this is not what we find. Rather, the DNA that has been tested from ancient human remains in South America shows a direct ancestral line. These studies were not done for the purpose of disproving a global flood, but rather to trace the migration of ancient humans. But the end result is the people of South America after the alleged flood are direct descendants of the people who lived there before the alleged flood, proving that there could not have been a global flood that wiped out this civilization 4,000 years ago.
You're nearing 15 minutes.
Researchers led by Emory University anthropologist John Lindo sequenced the whole genomes of 7 natives who lived in Peru's highlands between 1600 and 6,100 years ago. The team also collected dozens of DNA sequences from 2 modern native populations. Comparing these 2 DNA sequences revealed that the Andes lowland and highland peoples split about 8,750 years ago, give or take a few centuries. This is from the National Geographic article in the source material. The point of the study had nothing to do with Noah or a global flood, thus it is not referenced. However, had the DNA that was studied shown there was a break in the ancestral line, the article would have told us that there was a break a mere 4,000 years ago, rather than concluding that the latest known split occurred 8,750 years ago, several millennia off from the date given for the alleged flood. The historical evidence against there ever having been a global flood is overwhelming. The evidence against a flood even in Egypt during the time of Noah's alleged flood is overwhelming. Because there was no break in human history except for one family in ancient Assyria to correspond with this alleged global flood, the only possible conclusion is that there was no worldwide flood approximately 4,000 years ago that could be Noah's flood.
Thank you, Godless Granny. And we do have a super chat from Almost a Doctor for, I believe it's $5 in Australian currency. Thank you, Almost a Doctor. This is from 26 after the hour. I will post the question into the private chat so that you can read it. It is directed at Otangelo. How do you account for the heat of condensation? Also, hello, Godless Granny.
Hello, Mr. Doctor.
Yeah, to be frank, I am not an expert. I have not studied that specific topic. I just brushed it over in my introduction as my preparation for this conversation. So I cannot really give you a qualified answer, but I can study it and then maybe I come to a conclusion in regards of that question.
Okay, thank you, Otangelo. Now we have a comment from 29 after. I'm just posting this in the private chat. It is one that I think both of you could respond to. It's not really a question, but it's a comment that seemed very relevant to what you've both been introducing. In 29 after, Mage Grey Wolf stated, the Toronto Zoo in Canada requires approximately 2,200 to 3,300 pounds of food for their 6,000 vertebrates every day. This is pretty close to what some say were the number of animals on the Ark. Now, do either of you have responses to this that do you agree with it? Do you think it's wrong? Do you think it doesn't apply to the Ark, and why? Or do you think that exactly represents it and the Ark had a solution for it? Did you want to go first with this one, Otangelo?
Well, there are different numbers in regards of how many animals actually were on the Ark, and this the number has lowered to even 2,000 animals. So this is, of course, something which is very uncertain, and also the quantity of food that was necessary. Now, in the structure on Mount Ararat, what they did find are this kind of beans, which I said in the introduction, and they are very nutrient with proteins. So I mean, if they have been found there even today, they could have been preserved during that period and used as food for the animals. And I think I don't think this is a major problem in regards of the viability of keeping these animals for about a year on the Ark.
2 years.
Okay, thank you,
If you
Otangelo.
go with the
Godless
Bible
Granny.
story, they were on the Ark for 2 years.
Yeah, I don't know exactly now the number, how much time it was.
Godless Granny, did you have any reflection on this comment that was made by Mage Greenwood?
Yeah, that is definitely an issue, because if you're trying to put 2,000 pounds of food per day, let's see, 2,000 pounds of food times 365 days times 2 years is 1.4 million pounds of food. And in addition to that, you also need water. There's also major issues with the types of food. Koala bears will only eat eucalyptus leaves, and eucalyptus trees don't grow in Turkey or in Iraq. And so what did they do? Carry a tree on their backs in backpacks as they came to the Ark? Or did the boat go to Australia and pick them up?
Yeah, I think these are good questions, and I don't know if there are good answers to these questions. So I grant you that there are open questions, but I think chickpeas, which were used, I think this is a kind of nutrition which can be stored easily. It is probably high nutrition, so it doesn't take up so much volume. But besides of that, what you are saying about koalas, I agree that there are open questions, no doubt of that.
Well, the carnivores aren't going to eat chickpeas.
Well, I think they can eat chickpeas.
How do you do that? How do you get a lion to eat chickpeas instead of meat?
Well, I mean, I'm also, again, not an expert on these topics, so I cannot give you a qualified answer. It is certainly something which, I mean, people which I've talked about, like Philip Williams, if he wants, he can maybe one day come to your stream and have a conversation with you as well. I think he is probably more qualified to answer these questions, because he deals for decades with these issues and questions, why I'm more focused on other topics.
I will bring us to our next question, which I'm just posting in the private chat. It is in our priority queue because it comes from a 1-month member. Super chats and member questions go in the priority queue. At 44 after, the Lone Wanderer's Bunker asked, great, now I have that song. Oh, did I get the wrong thing? Whoops. Okay. I apologize. I must have had some trouble copying the wrong item here. I will have to get back to that. Oh, wait.
That was a mistake. At 44 after?
Yeah, it's... I misread. I thought it was. I thought they were tagging me because it was a question. We'll just skip that. That's obviously not what that was. That was just something else going on in the chat.
Okay.
Please disregard. I apologize, everybody. At 30 minutes after, Autobot Starscream, Autobot Starscream asked, Godless Granny, don't we have enough Ark shipwrecks to turn Noah's Ark into the new True Cross meme? That there are enough splinters of the True Cross to fill a train of boxcars?
That is an excellent question. Oh, I can't find it. You said it's at 30 after?
Yeah, 30 minutes after. I have posted in the private chat.
I can only scroll back to 34.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, that's fine. I can read the question again if you like.
Okay.
It's
the
hard.
question, I was not aware of that. I certainly am aware that there were people who claim that they have splinters from the cross, but I did not know that there were so many of them that that they could fill a whole train. That's interesting.
Okay, Otangelo, I don't suppose you really have anything you want to say on that one since it was directed to Godless Granny. So I'm going to move on to the next question here from Saria the Brave, which was asked at 31 minutes after. And I'm just going to post it in the private chat so you can read it while I read it. So Saria the Brave asked, is it even realistic that Noah's Ark would land in the same area as where it started after a whole year floating around? This question is for both of you. Otangelo, did you want to answer it first?
Well, yeah, I don't think that the Bible claims that the voyage started on Mount Ararat. It landed on Mount Ararat, but where it actually started, I don't think that is reported in the Bible.
No, it doesn't. But it certainly does have. I guess it doesn't really, but we know that they had to have been in that general vicinity because the Bible doesn't record anyone being in, Africa or South America or Australia prior to Babel.
There is a There is a question. There is a comment, a super chat comment for $5 from Nicholas Lamar Suter. He is directing at me, but because it's a super chat, I will read it out. He says, "No worries, Randolph. My default position is to disregard what you say." So he's being sarcastic, I suspect, and at least I hope he is. And thank you for your super chat donation, Nicholas.
Yes,
I appreciate it. Now, the next question comes from Mage Grey Wolf, and it is directed at both of you. It was asked at 41 minutes after. Mage Grey Wolf asked, "Why don't we see low genetic diversity in all animals like we see in cheetahs if they all were brought down to a population of 2 to 7? Did you want to go first, Otangelo?
Well, I'm not a geneticist, so I have no answer to that.
Okay, Godless Granny?
Actually, this brings up a point that I wanted to ask Otangelo, but Mage Grey Wolf is absolutely right. If this is a point that I was discussing with, I think it was Matt, Almost a Doctor. I'm not positive. Matt, you can correct me on that. That I was asking about genetic bottlenecks as well. If there really was a global flood, yeah. A bottleneck like that would have caused the extinction of so many different species. It's incredible because not all species can recover from such a bottleneck. And if the whole point of bringing 2 animals on the ark was to preserve them, if they're just going to die as soon as they get off of the ark, that was quite an incredible waste to save them through the flood just to have them die because their species can no longer repopulate. But that brought me to the question of, Otangelo, you said that there were only certain animals brought on the ark and that their species could be re-established through speciation, rapid speciation. How is the speciation rate supposed to get real fast after the arc and then go to what we see today afterwards?
No, we still see a fast speciation even today. I mean, like for example, there are lizards which had which have evolved in just a few generations from egg to having a placenta, and there are other examples. So I think that evolution based on speciation can happen much faster than the rates which are commonly claimed to be by proponents of evolution. So this is well known that speciation happens, and it can happen very rapidly.
Well, of course, speciation does happen. There's no question about that. But what my real question is what do you see as the causation for speciation suddenly becoming so rapid right after the flood and then going back to normal at some point afterward?
Well, I am not sure if that is the case. So I cannot answer your question because I don't know the numbers. So yeah.
Okay. If we went with the Answers in Genesis number that there were approximately 7,500 animals on the boat, to get to the number of species of animals that we have today, we would have to see a new species evolve every 6 days.
And I'll just note that 7,500 animals would be divide by 7 would come to a little over 1,000, almost 1,100 animals altogether. Because how many different species? I'm assuming, because my understanding is the ark there were 7 of each animal that went on the ark. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
There
Okay.
were 7 pairs of each clean animal and
so
2
about 500
of each unclean animal.
So the number should be around 500 to 550 different species, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does that sound right to you, Otangelo, or do you have some correction for us?
Well, the thing is that we have reported about 1.2 million different species, but a large number are insects. And I have open questions because the variety of insects is enormous. So, of course, I think that there was some debris and forest remains floating on the waters, and probably they did host some insects and small animals which maybe went through the flood. I don't know. I mean, we don't have precise data on this. So I think that, yeah.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to go on to the next question here at 42 minutes after. There's a special number for everybody, 42, from Icarus. I hope I'm saying the name correctly. Icarus asks, how did land plants survive? This question is for both of you. Would you like to go first, Otangelo? If you ever don't want to, you just pass to Godless Granny and you can be second.
Well, I am not sure. I have not studied this, so I cannot give a qualified answer either. But I can imagine that seeds maybe survived. I don't know.
My understanding is that every plant on the face of the earth would have died, because even plants breathe. Through photosynthesis, plants do breathe, and everything that has the breath of life perished. In addition to this, there's supposed to be 20 feet of salt water covering every plant on the face of the planet. There might be a couple of trees that might be over 20 feet tall that might have survived because they could reach the sunlight. But even if in that case, you still have the roots of the plant being covered in salt water, which they cannot use. They cannot get any kind of nutrient. And so every plant on the planet would have died, which also leads to incredible problems with the food supply, because you would not just need food for the 2 years that the animals are on the boat. you also need enough food to last until you can grow some more food after you get off the boat. And what about animals that are having to travel, like the kangaroos, back to Australia? How are they going to carry food with them along the way when there isn't any growing at this point?
I'm going to take this opportunity to ask one question out of order because it fits perfectly as a segue from this topic, the next part of this kind of topic. I've just posted it in the private chat for you at 56 minutes after. Tarim06 asked, why did God decide to wipe out everything on land, but had no problem with fish? Why no mention of people finding fish lying around / finding fish in lakes where they should not be after waters recede?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, I don't know.
And we'll get back to the other questions after this. So it just, this fits with the previous question very well that was asked by Icarus. So yeah, please feel free to elaborate on it. The crux of the question is, why did God decide to wipe out everything and had no problem with fish? So.
Yeah, and in addition, to the fish, not getting all mixed up, Autobot brings up a point as well. Why weren't the fish messed up by the waters getting mixed? I know Answers in Genesis tries to say that the response is that, well, it was all brackish water because the fresh water mixed with the salt water to produce brackish water, and the saltwater fish now were surviving in brackish water, and the freshwater fish in brackish water. The problem is that saltwater fish don't all survive in brackish water, and neither do freshwater fish all survive in brackish water. And how did they all manage to get back into the lakes and oceans where they belonged? That's another mystery.
Okay, so we have received another super chat from The Duke is the Man at 57 minutes after, $5. Thank you, Duke. Thank you, The Duke is the Man. This question is for Otangelo. If supernatural means are used to flood the earth, why would you think you would have natural evidence as proof?
Yeah, I don't know up to what point God acted supernaturally in that event. And maybe some of the questions, which I think they are justified, maybe God did intervene somehow supernaturally to permit that everything could start to flourish again after the flood, that we could be here today. So that is a hypothesis which I think is on the table.
Okay.
One thing I'm wondering is, if God is just, if the whole purpose is to wipe out man and cause this one family to survive, why not just put the one family on a little tiny boat and pick up the boat, flood the whole earth, and when the water goes, then put the boat back on earth? I mean, why bother with putting the animals on it and making it float around? I mean, why go through all this rigmarole if you can just magic it all to start with?
Yeah, I don't like. Yeah, Kelly, I don't like what if or hypothetical scenarios. I mean, we can go all along, not only in regards of the flood, but in regards of many other issues. What if did God create the best possible world? So we are entering here into speculation and philosophical issues, which I think do not lead anywhere, really.
Well, you're right. We could come up with what if scenarios all day long, but the real point is that if God is supposed to be omniscient, what possible reason is there for going through such a ridiculous, pointless killing that was completely unnecessary?
Yeah, if it was unnecessary, that is another question. The Bible is very clear and said that humans were all evil prior to the flood. There was nobody that was doing good, and it was God's judgment upon humanity. So, I mean, we can question God all day, but in the end of the thing is we have a human limited perspective. God, as I know him, is all powerful, all knowledgeable, and he has his reasons why he acted this way and not another way.
You
And,
misunderstand my question. My question isn't
okay.
why God would kill people. My question is why use such a ridiculously inefficient method? If God has the capability of doing it Thanos style and simply snapping his fingers and they all drop dead, why go to all this trouble? If God has the ability to just simply think it or speak it and they all drop dead, why all this rigmarole?
Yeah, as said, I mean, these are questions which I cannot give you an answer. We should be able to ask God directly because he's choose that solution. So maybe we have someday answers to that. I don't.
I'll move on to our next question then. At 47 minutes past, almost a doctor asked to Otangelo, did Noah bring specialized food for all the animals? I am thinking of the koalas, he said.
Yeah, again, I mean, it is possible. Why not? I mean, I think bamboo trees, they existed prior to the food, and he certainly knew that koalas, they eat bamboo, so why not?
Are you
Eucalyptus.
thinking of panda bears?
Yeah, I think he's thinking of panda bears.
Yeah, eucalyptus. Yeah.
Koalas? Yeah, but that's
panda
fine.
bears, right.
I think we get your point, though. That's fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah. My understanding of koala bears, I'll just interject, is that they are actually, of the panda bears, is that they are originally carnivorous, but they love bamboo more than anything. And in a place where there's an abundance of bamboo, that's all they eat. So, it's like a kid in a candy store, forget dinner, they're going to eat candy all the time. That's got just a little interjection.
We also don't know if they always liked to eat bamboo. So maybe they were carnivorous back then, and then they changed. I don't know.
Okay. We do have another question from our audience at 50 minutes past. Gonna go for it. Asked for both. Egypt doesn't have a flood myth, but does have a continuous history. Would this be evidence against a flood? Would you like to go first, Otangelo, or would you like Godless Granny to address this first?
Well, we have flood stories all over the world. There are supposedly almost 500 flood stories, and I think this is powerful evidence that which is part of the case of the flood. So, why the Egypts don't have a flood story, I really don't know.
Yeah, I would answer Peter and say that, absolutely this is evidence against a global flood because in answer to what Otangelo said, of course there are flood myths around the world because flooding is a common event. There's also stories about famine around the world because famines are common events. And so it's not at all surprising. In fact, even the Noah myth is very similar to the Gilgamesh myth that predates it. And I don't remember the name of the young woman that I saw in a video the other day. She was talking about another myth that predates the Noah myth and has a lot of very similar characteristics, including the releasing of 3 birds. And so, the existence of flood myths certainly isn't evidence that one of those myths, and not even the original one at that, is the true one or that this one happened. But I think Peter's question is exactly one of my biggest talking points, is that there is a continuous history of people living and building and writing and doing all kinds of things in Egypt. and they never have a break for a couple hundred years because of a flood that wiped them out. If you don't mind, I'd like to bring up Almost a Doctor's comment next. Actually,
Sure.
it's a question. Yeah, it's right after Peter's, which is why
Okay,
I grabbed it.
I'll read it out.
Okay.
So the question from God, since I am moderating here, that question from Almost a Doctor is for Godless Granny. Do you know what the oldest continuous human culture is?
No, I do not. That is something that I looked up for this presentation. I am not a historian. I did look at a lot of different sites, and I got about 4 different answers. So I do not know which one would be the oldest.
The next question is for both of you. 1 hour and 6 minutes past, from Icarus. Why did God kill all the innocent people, like all the children and the wives' families? Isn't God incapable of sinning/murder? Godless Granny, would you like to answer this first or pass it to Otangelo?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Who was it from? I'm looking for it.
It is from Icarus at 1 hour and 6 minutes past.
Icarus, there it is. Okay. Yeah, this is one of the questions that I frequently bring up to apologists. You know, when apologists keep telling me that God only kills guilty people, and God, I bring this up in answer to the question on abortion. When people tell me that God loves children, I say, well, then why does God kill children? And whenever they say, oh, God would never kill a child, I said, what about all the babies that were drowned in the flood? That's usually the last I hear of the apologist. I have yet to hear an apologist give me a reason why they think that it's okay for God to kill babies, but not other people. Although I have heard some people say that God can do anything he wants. He made the people, he could destroy the people. So it's his right to kill children if he wants to kill children. And, well, fine, but then don't tell me that God loves children and wants to protect them.
Otangelo.
Yeah, but yeah, we are talking here about a unique event which happened only once, and I mean, of course, these are difficult questions. I agree with what has been said. So in the end, I leave it to God, and I trust God that He knows the reasons and why He did choose the way He did and why that event happened. So.
I do have a question for each of you, but Godless Granny, it looks like you wanted to respond to Otangelo, so let's go with that first.
I just wanted to say, you said that this was a unique event, and yes, the alleged flood is a unique event in being a flood, but it certainly isn't unique in the only time that God killed innocent children, because at the time of the Exodus, you know, God tells the story of how he killed all of the firstborn in Egypt, and he killed innocent children then too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can go just with what other apologists say, that God has his rights to give and to take lives. So it is in his faculty to do so.
There is a question from 1 hour and 9 minutes past from Nicholas Lamar Suter. He states and asks, China existed before and after the flood. No breaks. How was the language and culture brought back after the flood exactly as it had been prior? How did the records survive? This is a question for both of you. Did you want to go first, Otangelo?
Well, I have no idea. I've not studied this,
okay.
So I cannot answer.
Godless Granny?
And yeah, this is the point that I was making in my argument when I said that if the flood occurred, God would have had to have miraculously preserved the entire civilization, flooded out the land underneath it, and then plopped it right back up on top. If you believe that God did that, you know, preserving all these cultures and artifacts and stuff and plopping it all on top of the fossils, fine, but it's kind of a weird thing to do.
Okay, a special thank you to Ted Franks, who's been a member for 2 months. They've put up some kind of a happy face for you that got special highlighting. I guess it's similar to a super chat. Appreciate that, Ted. Thank you very much. The question that I have for each of you is, I guess, what do you think? What have you encountered that seem to be one of the best arguments against your own? So, for Otangelo, what seemed to be the best argument, that one of the better arguments you've encountered that attempts to defeat the idea of the flood? And Godless Granny, what changed from defeat to proof for the same question? Who would like to go first? Did you want to start, Godless Granny?
I really think that the flood is the weakest link in the entire Bible, because it's probably the hardest thing to defend. And the way you see apologists just bending over backwards to try to make reality fit the flood is laughable at times. But I think if I had to pick something, it would be what Otangelo mentioned earlier. Yeah, there are flood myths in every culture on the planet, and some of them do show some similarity.
And Otangelo, the reverse question for you: what seemed to be the best argument against your position that presents that there was not a global flood? What was the best? What is one of the better arguments you've encountered?
No, I think the fact that the Egypts don't have a flood story, and supposedly, which I don't know, if there is a continuous history in China, then this, of course, is a big question mark.
Okay. We do have a few more questions that came up in the chat while we address this. Thank you both for answering these questions, all of them. The next one is, did we already cover? We already covered that one. I apologize. That's okay. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Almost a Doctor asked at 1 hour and 12 minutes after into the video. It is, if we all came from Mesopotamia, how come those early cultures were not Jewish if they are descendants of Noah? Otangelo, would you like to answer this one first?
Well, the Jewish people, they started with Abraham in Ur, in Chaldea, and started from there. So, yeah.
Okay. Godless Granny, some perspective on this?
Well, even if they weren't Jewish, and you're right, the Jewish faith wasn't begun as such until Abraham, which was a few generations later. Noah still worshipped the God of Abraham, supposedly. Isn't that the whole reason why he was saved? Is that he believed in God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he had his trust in God, and that's why he believed God when God told him to make the ark, and when he told him to call the animals. So certainly his God was the same God as the God of Abraham. And so I think it's a fair question.
So we ended up going a little longer into these questions. Did either of you have critiques on each other's opening statements, or questions that came up when you were listening that come to mind for you, or points that you'd like some clarification on? Otangelo, if something comes to mind for that, you're welcome to go first.
Yeah, Kelly said right at the beginning of her introduction that finding a wooden structure which on Mount Ararat, that wouldn't be good evidence for Noah's flood, and I would really disagree with that. I mean, there are many questions about the structure, which I believe is Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, how it got there. I mean, if it would be a wooden house, then okay, but that what has been found there is a really a wooden structure of huge dimensions. It's broken up in two parts. It has huge walls with pitch on it. There are remains of food like this chicken beans, and pottery of ancient time. And I mean, archaeological teams, they are preparing now to go there and make their scientific investigation. And I mean, I think this is very powerful evidence of Noah's Ark. So I disagree with Kelly that this shouldn't be taken seriously and as a relevant issue.
Well, first, as you just admitted, we don't even know that it is a boat. So
Yes, we do know that. Yes, we know it.
how do
It
you
is a
know it's a
boat.
boat?
Well, I can give you some links, but there are huge wooden walls. It's a 3-floor structure which is broken up. The floors they fall down in from 90 degrees to 45 degrees or so. We have pictures of that. There are huge wooden walls with pitch on the structure, and everything indicates that it is actually a boat. It is not a house or something like that.
Well, maybe it's not a single dwelling house, but maybe it's a large structure that many people lived in, or I don't know, maybe it's an observation point, who knows? But it's an ancient structure on a mountain that is there anything about the structure that is evidence that it was a boat?
Yes, I'm certain of that. What the locals say is that the boat was on top of Mount Ararat until 1840, and then there was an earthquake, and it went down on a crevasse, and it broke up in two parts, and it is deep buried under ice. And I mean, the pictures are, in my understanding, they're very clear that these are the remains of a boat. It is not a house.
I still don't hear you saying anything that would indicate that it's a boat. Does
Well, as I said, there are huge curved walls with pitch. It is a
a
3-floor
structure can
structure.
have curved walls? There's structures with
Well, I
curved
mean,
walls.
okay, but I mean, this is a completely broken up structure, deep buried under ice, which came down on a crevasse. So you cannot expect something structured or like that. It is a complete how can I say, chaos. Okay, but I think if you've not seen the videos
I have
of
seen the
Philip Williams.
videos.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that should give you a clear idea about what it is there. And I mean, you can make up your mind. In my understanding, it is the remains of a huge boat.
Okay, so you think it's a boat, but from what I've read, other people are not so sure that it is a boat. The second thing that I've read is that there's uncertainty as to when the piece is dated to. And another thing that is, even if this was a boat, how is the existence of a boat evidence of a flood? I mean, my sister has a boat. She didn't have a flood.
Yeah, of course. But first of all, this matches with the Genesis account of Noah's Ark landing on Mount Ararat, and we have that there.
Okay,
This wooden structure is there.
that's still
So I
consistent
mean,
with a local
this
flood.
well, you could say it is a local flood, but up on 14,000 feet, I don't.
Tsunami,
I mean, we have
a
all the other.
tornado.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
I
know how
think
the
then
boat got on top of the mountain. That's a flood is not the only possible reason that the boat could get on a mountain. And even if it was a flood, again, it doesn't mean it was a global flood. If there was evidence
yeah,
in
there.
other parts of the world of a global flood, I'd say, okay, yeah, you got a point. But all you've shown me is evidence of one boat in one place.
Yes, but we have that evidence, and I showed it also in the introduction. We had forests in the North Pole, in Antarctica, and in the South Pole as well. It was a completely different environment. It was hotter, and that is, and I mean, there is coal buried all over the globe, and I mean, there is evidence that it was a global flood and not just local.
I couldn't hear what you said was at the poles that is evidence of a flood.
Well, there were forests there, which were in warm temperatures, and there is a buried coal And I mean, I've presented that in my introduction.
I know you
so-
did, and I couldn't catch everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I can give you the link. I can give the link afterwards, and you can
Okay.
look it up.
Now, Godless Granny, there is one question in our priority queue from a member. Would you like me to ask that first,
Sure,
or
go ahead.
do you? Okay, so this question is from Ted Franks, who's been a member for 1 month. So members get to go in the priority queue. It's 1 hour and 18 minutes after, and then part 2 of it was 1 hour and 20 minutes after. Ted Franks asks, don't you think that it's childish and irresponsible to punish everyone for what a few have done? And not only that, but at a later date? If God was a real thing, it's bad and evil parenting to do what it does to us as a species, I suppose. Did you want to address this first, Otangelo, or pass it to Godless Granny to address first? It is a question for both of you.
Well, I don't really understand the question, so I pass it to
Okay.
Basically, Ted is asking if you think it's childish and irresponsible to punish everyone for the transgressions of only a few people.
So is he referring to Noah's flood or to Adam and Eve, and then that original sin?
Probably,
was passed over
my assumption is
to
going to be probably a bit of everything, but I would say primarily be focused on the context of this video, which is evidence of a global flood. So I would frame it at the context of the flood.
Well, the Bible says that God punished humankind because all people were evil, not just a few people. So, and that only Noah was found as a good man. So, yeah.
Godless Granny, your perspective?
I'd like to ask Otangelo a couple of questions about that answer. First, if Noah was the only righteous person, why did God save Noah's sons and the sons' wives if they are evil people?
Well, maybe it was included his family. I'm not sure. But if
God said that everyone was evil, does that mean the children were evil too?
no.
So then you've got God punishing the innocent with the wicked.
Yeah, as I said, I think that God has the right, as God, to give and to take lives, and so He had his reasons to do so, and I am not in the position to give any opinion on that. I think that God has an overall understanding as all-knowing God. Why He did decide to punish also children and everyone. So
Then the next question I would have,
Oh,
if
go ahead,
God
Granny.
is supposed to be omniscient, the flood was obviously a catastrophic failure, as evil had returned to the world within a few years after the flood. I mean, you've got Noah passed out drunk in his tent just a year or two after the flood, and this is supposed to be the one righteous man in the world. The flood was a catastrophic failure because God didn't get rid of evil.
yeah, I think that the people before the flood, they were very brutal, very, very evil, probably on much a higher degree than today. So yeah.
Godless Granny, what is your reaction to to that question that was asked by Ted Franks?
Well, that's part of why I don't believe in God. Because yeah, I do think it's irresponsible to punish the innocent with the guilty, and especially when, he didn't even get the guilty, because we know from the story that Noah wasn't much better himself. And
Yeah, I would like to question you on that, Kelly, because to me, when you said first time to me why you abandoned your faith in God, it was a surprise, because I think, even let's suppose that we cannot fully understand why God permitted this to happen, that event. I mean, one thing has nothing to do with the other. How does that lead you to the no God hypothesis? I mean,
The answer is because my faith was built entirely on the Bible being the inerrant, the complete inerrant Word of God. If the Bible was the complete inerrant word of a perfect God, then it has to be perfect. If it is wrong on one point, it is no longer inerrant. And once it was proven to me that the flood did not happen, there is no longer a reason to believe that the Bible is inerrant. And if the Bible isn't
okay.
inerrant, it's not the word of God, it's just the writing of some people, then who is God? I have no basis for belief in God.
Yeah, I think that all these points which you have raised, they are justified. They're difficult questions. I fully agree with you on that, and I don't have the answers either. But opposed to you, that has not been even thinking about to abandon my faith because I have no answers to certain events and certain questions. So I question also your that methodology which you applied to say that because God is perfect, His word must be perfect, and if it's not perfect, then He doesn't exist. Couldn't it be that maybe we are just not?
No, you missed a point in the logic there. If God's word isn't perfect, then I don't have anything on which I can base my knowledge of God. Because everything I know about God is from this Bible. And if the Bible is not the word of God as I was taught, I don't have anything on which to base any knowledge of God.
Yeah, I think that like for example, there are things in the Bible which we know are contradictory. I mean, atheists, of course, they can point out hundreds or even thousands of things which appear to be contradictory. But what we cannot forget is that God used fallible humans to write, to reveal Himself to us. So, for example, the date of the birth of Christ, it is uncertain if it was 4 BC or 6 BC. There are many other open questions. So I don't agree that the Bible is infallible in that sense because it was written by fallible people. They were inspired by God. They wrote down what God revealed to them, but nonetheless, there are things which are not 100% as you say it should be. But that doesn't mean, to me at least, that therefore the Bible is not true or that it is not the revealed word of God.
And I have, since my deconversion, met a number of people who are of that opinion. That was not the opinion that had been taught to me for the 42 years that I was a believer. You know, while I was a believer, it was always, this is the complete inerrant word of God. And because that was broken, you know, everything that I had based my faith on was gone. Now, your viewpoint is, I would admit, a valid viewpoint. And I have met other people who say that not everything in the Bible is correct, but they still believe in God. Okay, that's fine. But since I have deconverted, a lot of things have changed. And it, you know, that was the beginning point. But since then, I have found so many things that are wrong with the Bible. And once I started viewing Christianity from the outside instead of from the inside, it doesn't look so good.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a little bit different. Kelly, I am a Christian for 36 years, so it's not since yesterday. And um, I've not just taken the Bible, but since I constantly had dialogues with atheists and they always raised questions and doubts and challenges to me, that has always been a reason for me to look a little bit beyond just the Bible and to start a little bit to educate myself in regards of questions that have to do with origins, which is in regards of physics, biochemistry, biodiversity, evolution, consciousness, philosophy, and all these topics which you well know, they are constantly coming up in dialogues between atheists and theists. And that development of my seeking and searching has, rather than bringing me farther away from God, it has deepened my faith in the sense that I cannot understand, in special atheists which actually do have a scientific understanding, how they still can be atheists, because the evidence is huge and powerful, and the teleological argument in special, the argument of design, which we can observe in the natural
Well, we'll
world,
have to save
is
that for
so-
another day because we're already out of time, but there are a couple of things. I really want to get to Peter's comment here because
Godless Granny, I
Oh,
do
go-
have a few questions but
Okay.
go ahe and do that. I'll read it
Okay.
out. Gonna go for it. It's,
Peter
if God,
says, if God, go
Oh.
ahead.
yeah, Peter states, Godless Granny, if God couldn't convey his word to fallible men, he's not perfect. He could also have written the Bible himself without the use of man. And please note, there are a few more questions in the queue. I would like to get them covered.
Yeah, I wanted to comment to something on this and then we'll get to those questions. And yeah, this was another point that, it goes along with what Peter said, and part of my response to what Otangelo just said is, if there really was a perfect God that wanted a relationship with me, sending someone else to write something to tell me about what this God is thinking about is not a good way to have a relationship. If someone wants a relationship with me, they should be coming to me and telling me they want a relationship with me, not sending someone else to tell someone else to tell someone else to tell someone else to tell me.
Well, I think that God became a man in Christ precisely for that, to tell us that. And he relied on the apostles and on the eyewitnesses, and they wrote down what they saw, and they gave us a trustworthy document which we can read, which we can understand, and which we can test in our own lives, as I have done in my career as a Christian. And I see no problem that God hasn't talked to me directly to tell me that he wants a relationship with me. The biblical record for me has been enough.
Okay, what are some of the questions we need to get to?
At 1 hour and 16 minutes in, Mage Grey Wolf asked, how did the Ark survive being made entirely of wood? We know boats that size at least require metal reinforcement to keep from snapping in half, even in calm water.
Well, they used very, very interesting methods, and that can actually even be seen in the structure on Mount Ararat. And I think the scientific investigation which is underway, they will certainly also elucidate how these the planks and so forth, how they were mounted together. And in the pictures we can see they had good technology actually for that time back.
And I'll just
So I don't see any problem in regards of the stability of the structure, even of this size, that it could be functional. I think that is not an issue.
And to interject just with what I think is a fair point, the material mentioned in the Bible is gopher wood, and there doesn't seem to be a lot known about what gopher wood's properties are compared to other types of wood. Does that make sense to you, Otangelo?
Yeah, I mean, if we don't know, we don't know.
Okay. Godless Granny, that question was directed for both of you.
I would just add another layer onto that question, and that is, I have seen something written talking about how quickly wood decays, and if Noah spent 100 years building the boat, the portions that he built at the beginning would already have decayed by the time he finished the boat.
No, I don't think so. We have actually in the South Pacific, there are islands from natives, and they are still using today canoes which are almost 100 years old, and they are in perfect state. So that doesn't withstand scrutiny.
We do have 4 more questions. I'm going to start with the question in the priority queue because it's from a member who's been a member for 1 month. At 1 hour and 33 minutes in, Ted Franks asks, I have a question. If an idiot like me can raise a good kid, and when I make something, I make it to last and not screw up, why couldn't a God do it? And I'm just going to make one objection in there. I disagree with you, Ted, with your self-characterization of being an idiot. I don't think you are. So I guess, Otangelo, would you like to take on this question first?
Yeah, I would again have to speculate. So I leave it to God why he decided to proceed the way he did.
Okay, Godless Granny?
Well, the answer that I was given as to why God made people to be such screw-ups was because he needed them to be that way. And this is the Calvinist answer coming, is one of, the major purpose of God is to display his glory. And in order to display his justice and his mercy, he had to have a being that was unjust that he could exercise justice upon. And that's why he made humans and made them sinners, so that they would sin, so that he could display his justice and that he could save a few of them. And on those, he could demonstrate his mercy.
Okay, thank you. Our next question was from 1 hour and 25 minutes in, from iJinx0. What was the goal or purpose of the flood, and did it actually work? This will be a question for both of you. Otangelo, would you like to answer it first?
Yeah, it was a judgment on unrighteous and evil people, and the purpose was to restart.
Godless Granny?
Did you say that it did work or it didn't work? I didn't hear you.
Well, that is again a difficult question. It did work in what sense? I mean, if God achieved his goal, I think yes, he achieved his goal. He punished that civilization and he restarted. So if his goal was this, then he achieved it.
iJinx0, if you want to add a clarifying point about what you mean by what actually worked, I'll be happy to interject it in here after Godless Granny addresses this question of yours.
Yeah, I would say that, the flood was, is a ridiculous story about a God that has a hissy fit because his creation isn't the way he intended it to be. And yet he's also supposed to be this perfect being that knew that this is exactly what was going to happen if he made them this way. He chose to make them this way anyway. And lo and behold, they ended up the exact way he knew they would end up, and he's going to punish them for it. Makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is always amazing when atheists start to ramble about God and his decisions as if they knew better than an all-knowing creator.
Okay. The next question at 90 minutes in is from Icarus. I heard that angels mated with humans and created Nephilim, and God wanted to kill these hybrids with the flood. Is that correct? This is a question for Otangelo.
I don't know.
Okay.
I actually thought about bringing this question up. If you guys want to talk for a minute, there's something I want to pull up.
Yeah. I'm just responding to people in the chat. But are you familiar with this story about the angels mating with the humans? And can you confirm that is this an understanding that you have, Otangelo, that God wanted to kill the hybrids with the flood, or this is just something that's just not in your wheelhouse?
No, I heard about this, but I mean, there is something indicating this in Genesis, but I mean, there is so little information about this to have a clear picture about what actually happened. So I cannot give an opinion on this matter.
What I'm looking for is, yes, Icarus makes a great point, because the Nephilim actually were not destroyed in the flood. And this is one more evidence against the flood, is that the Nephilim continued to exist after the flood. That's what I'm looking for, is the reference to the Nephilim that comes after the flood. and I'm not finding it at the moment.
I'm
But
just going to go ahead.
Did someone else put it in the chat while I was
Um,
looking for it? Okay.
Well, iJinxO clarified, so I'm just put that in my priority queue for a moment. To what they were asking earlier, and did it actually work? Talking about the purpose or goal of the flood. So iJinx has written that my understanding is that the flood was supposed to get rid of evil. And sorry, let me just bring it up here again. This was, I'll just tell you, it was at 1 hour and 41 minutes in. So my understanding is that the flood was supposed to get rid of evil. Am I correct? Yet this evil continues on, according to what the Bible deems as such. I guess that's the clarifying point that iJinxO was trying to make earlier with the earlier question about did the flood actually work? Does that help you, Otangelo, to give a clear answer?
No, as I said previously, I think that the evil, the pre-flood evil, it was much worse, and probably God, he saw that it was hopeless to continue like that, and so he decided to restart. And that doesn't mean that we don't have evil today, but probably it is in a much smaller proportion compared to what was pre-flood.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to that, Godless Granny, before we move on to the next question?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't find the reference that I was looking for.
So the next question is from 32 minutes and 1 hour in from Gonna Go For It. Godless Granny, if God couldn't convey his word to be fallible men, he's not perfect. He could also have written the Bible himself without the use of man. I guess he wants you to reflect on this.
Yeah, I think I already put that one up there earlier.
Oh, okay. I am queuing these and keeping track of it.
That's okay.
So.
That's okay. And I took it out of order. That was my fault entirely.
No problem. I do have a different one from him, so I will post that up now. It's at what it is 37 and 1 hour and 37 minutes in. It says, since they have tested wood from Otangelo's arc finding, shouldn't we now know what gopher wood is? Do either of you know what he's referring to about the test?
That's a good point.
Well, I think they made tests in Iran or so, and these tests have been questioned. What I can say is that there is a new expedition being organized with scientists from the United States and Turkey, and their intent is to do a scientific exploration of that structure there and to get reliable data also in regards of the age. So maybe we should wait until this is out to have a more clear picture in regards of that structure.
That seems fair. Godless Granny, do you have any commentary on that? Or this was for Otangelo.
I hadn't thought of that, but Peter's absolutely right. You know, if this structure on Mount Ararat is in fact Noah's Ark, and yes, there have been tests done on it. So if this was in fact the Ark, and if Noah made it out of gopher wood, then we should definitely have all the information that we need on the scientific structure of gopher wood.
Yeah, I'm interested in gopher wood. I have this, I've made jokes about this a few times in other chats where I said, perhaps the TARDIS from the Doctor Who science fiction television show was constructed of gopher wood, and that's why it's so much larger on the inside than the outside. Perhaps the Ark had the same property, as made of gopher wood. Maybe they're both made of gopher wood. And Otangelo, I hope you enjoy this. I'm not meaning to be negative or anything.
No.
So
no worries.
Yeah. So at 1 hour and 39 minutes in, Titan Uranus ask a question for Otangelo. Is it possible that God was an alien who gave Noah a shrink ray and the ark was a dinghy? Oh boy. Well, if you want to use sarcasm in your response to this, I totally understand.
Well, just leave it by it.
Because it is our last question. So make your answer a great one if you want to.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Now, I think there was some question you had perhaps about Otangelo's opening statement before you finished here, Godless Granny, because he did ask something about yours. I don't think you
No,
got a
I did.
chance
I did not.
to get
I
to
did
his.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap everything up then. Otangelo, did you want to give any closing comments or show for anything that you have coming up on your channel or your website or whatever?
No, I'm actually not much active right now at my own channel. So for who doesn't know, I have actually two channels on YouTube. One is the God Talk, the other is Intelligent Design Academy, and I have a virtual library. It's reasonscience.catsport.com. So
I want to just point out, I really hope I was saying Titan's name correctly. I want everybody in our audience to know that your participation here, tuning in, is greatly appreciated. I'm really glad you all came, and I hope you all had a great time and found this to be an interesting conversation. I certainly enjoyed it, and I think Otangelo and Godless Granny had a really great conversation. It worked out very nicely, and I thank you both for bringing me on as a moderator. For those who don't know, I am Randolph Richardson. I'm with the Canadian Atheists. You can find out more about our organization at www.canadianatheists.ca. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It was a pleasure to moderate this. You both were excellent and very easy to work with on this. So thank you very much, and I think I learned a few things here today.
Okay, very good. And there is a link to Otangelo's channel in the description. There is a link to Randolph's channel and Randolph's website, or to the Canadian website. The Canadian Atheist website in the description as well as my link tree in the description. And as far as coming up this week, I will be releasing a video on Joshua and the Battle of Jericho and whether or not that was a historic fact. And Robin sings in that one. So that one. And then next week for stream on Wednesday night, we're doing a Halloween special. And Math Pig is going to do a pumpkin carving demonstration. Kitty the Atheist is going to show some Halloween decorating tips. And somebody else is doing a craft, and I can't remember who it is. And I'm trying to get Brainbug to come on and do some creepy bugs, but I'm still working on that one. And so with that, thank you, Otangelo. You have been a great guest. You've been very patient. I know that at times I can be a little overbearing, and so I'm glad that you were able to be patient with that. Randolph, I think you've been an absolutely wonderful moderator. It's been a pleasure having you. And thank you to everyone who came in the chat. Live your life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good night.
Carly. It was fun to be at your channel.